When you think of China, do you think of dragons? Even though dragons, as we think of them, aren't around if they ever were. But I do. I think of dragons spitting fire, not Puff the Magic Dragon. And when I think of India, I think of those beautiful, majestic elephants. Well, the two big economies in the world, frankly, and in Asia, are emerging, and we have to learn to take a lot more notice. But what's of interest is that they're competing with each other in some ways and cooperating in others. And maybe looking at that competition, cooperation through Afghanistan will give us an interesting insight. Joining me now to talk about just that is a PhD scholar at the National University of Singapore, Chayanika Saxena. Chayanika Saxena, welcome to Counterpoint.
Thank you so much, Amanda.
Well, China and India, they are sort of in competition, aren't they?
Very much.
But they can cooperate. Now, you've selected Afghanistan as the prism through which we should look at this. Tell us first about China's role in Afghanistan and how that's changed over the last, well, I think it's the last 12, 14, 15 years.
Sure. It's not really me who's chosen Afghanistan as a site for cooperation. It's the government of India and the government of PRC who have decided to go ahead with what looks like a possible camaraderie in Afghanistan, which is something that they agreed on during an informal summit that had happened between the Prime Minister of India and the President of China, I think in July. And they decided to work on Afghanistan in various capacities, although those capacities are still to be decided what they would look like. Now, as far as China's role in Afghanistan is concerned, it has actually transformed in the last about 18 years that China has been in Afghanistan. So it began on a relatively like a low-key note. China was in Afghanistan as a donor. It was in Afghanistan contributing to various aspects such as humanitarian-related aspects such as disaster management, provision of food supplies and stuff like that. However, its role in Afghanistan started undergoing a change beginning 2011, and for a variety of reasons, which are both internal to it as well as because of the external environment and the external factors such as United States withdrawal or drawdown from Afghanistan. So these factors contributed in transforming how China involved itself in Afghanistan and how China viewed its responsibilities towards this country.
So China now has a larger role than it did, say, 12 years ago.
Yes, it very much. Its role in Afghanistan has expanded and in various ways. So it's not only contributing to Afghanistan economically, it's Afghanistan's largest investor at this point of time. It's also contributing to its political and strategic stabilization by helping the Afghan government talk to Taliban, by ensuring that Pakistan is on board, and by instituting various forums for discussion such as the QCG.
What about India? There's been a quest for status generally, but through Afghanistan may be one way to look at that.
I definitely think that way. In fact, my dissertation was precisely on this very point. That the reason why India is in Afghanistan is because it wants to demonstrate, it wants to display its status as a rising power. It wants to show itself as a regional power. And it is precisely for these reasons that India is in Afghanistan, although its journey in Afghanistan has been very challenging, it has been daunting, because the fact that we have a neighbor who is not interested in letting us be in Afghanistan, letting us work in Afghanistan. And then we had some challenges coming from the United States of America, which because of the fact that it wanted to give Pakistan an upper hand in Afghanistan, did not allow India to play the kind of role it wanted in Afghanistan.
Well, they provide significant material assistance. That's important. But their democratic past might also be considered of assistance. I mean, they have experience in forms of government that China doesn't have.
Very much the case. So India so far has provided about $3 billion in economic assistance. Apart from that, India has also helped Afghanistan in building its dams, its parliament, other infrastructural facilities. But what's of greatest importance to Afghanistan and what it basically, I think, borrows from India is a kind of democratic inspiration, as you just mentioned. India being a democratic country and having a relatively decent democratic record makes India a kind of third world country that Afghanistan can look up to for a successful democratic experiment. So we have assisted Afghanistan in local government experiments. So we have had tie-ups with various ministries of Afghanistan, which help them build their human resource in a manner that can allow them to transform their country from what it was before 2001 to something that is relatively more democratic, more stable.
I'm talking with Chayanika Saxena, PhD scholar at the National University of Singapore, about cooperation between China and India in Afghanistan. OK, we've had a bit of a chat about China and a bit of a chat about India, but you mentioned how they've had a meeting and they've decided to work together. But when will we see the impact of that, do you think? When are we actually going to see on-the-ground things, and do you have any idea where they will be?
That's a tough question, to be very honest with you, because the governments, both in India and China, they're yet to decide what the future cooperation would look like. However, from whatever meetings that the governments have had, both informally and formally, and then on the sidelines of various multilateral whatever participations that we have had, it seems that it will be in the areas of human resource development, as well as certain infrastructural projects such as mining, railway construction, roads construction. But we don't really know what the cooperation would look like. However, we can say with some amount of surety that cooperation will happen in Afghanistan between the two countries because they see it in their interest, and their interest in Afghanistan, at least in my opinion, they do not clash. So cooperation will happen. When that will happen and what it will look like, I think we'll have to wait at least for one more year till the time India does not get done with its elections and we don't get to know who would lead the country in the year to come.
Now, you say they're on different tracks, but they're not in conflict with each other. Mm-hmm. Can you describe in just one or two sentences what track are the Chinese on, and then tell us what track the Indians are on?
Sure. So the basic difference between the two countries, I think, in my opinion, would be one of them, which is India, is in Afghanistan for the purpose of displaying its status. China, on the other hand, does not consider Afghanistan to be its strategic backyard. It just happens to be one of the countries which is bordering its restive provinces. So China is in Afghanistan not for the purpose of showing its status, but it's in Afghanistan for its own security reasons. It wants to keep stability in Afghanistan so as to ensure that its restive provinces on the western side of the country, they remain intact, they remain stable. So the two countries are in Afghanistan, at least discursively, for very, very different reasons. India is in Afghanistan to demonstrate that it's a rising power, whereas China has now taken its rising status for granted, and it does not want a theatre where it can display it.
Do you think there's a chance that by working together, that model, well, if they develop something you can call a model, but the experience of working together, at least in Afghanistan, is likely to lead to China wanting India to participate in other projects in the region?
That would be a little tough for the simple reason that Afghanistan is an area where the strategic interests, they overlap, but in areas such as Nepal, Bangladesh, which are basically the core South Asian region, their interests actually are in conflict with each other, and which you might have come across in various articles and their reports and stuff. Afghanistan happens to be on the periphery of the strategic interests of China, and it happens to be also not on the periphery, but at least it's not core in the sense that it's not very basic or very important to the South Asian configuration, because of which I believe the template of cooperation in Afghanistan might not have replicable effect in other parts of South Asia. We do not know what the cooperation would look like in Africa, but it's most likely that Afghanistan's template will not have any kind of resonance in other regional areas.
That's a bit disappointing, isn't it? Because when, at a personal level, when people who don't think they could get on learn to work together effectively, often they can go and apply that newfound knowledge of each other's bearableness to other areas. And so it is with nation-states that haven't in the past experienced working together. If they can, it's good to apply it elsewhere. And Africa would be a classic example of where they might have a common interest in doing so.
Okay, so emotionally, maybe, yes, it's a little disappointing, but since international relations is not run on emotions, it's run primarily on interest, I think it would make sense to not have the same model. It's like you cannot have a factory line where you use a particular template in order to produce cooperation.
I understand. The cooperation has to fit the problem that you're dealing with, and that will be different in each case.
Yeah, and it'll be entirely context dependent. So what we're expecting in Afghanistan is completely different from what we might expect in Pakistan or what we might expect in our neighboring countries like Nepal and Bangladesh. So I think Afghanistan becomes a kind of like a pressure wall, considering that India and China are involved in competition or conflict, whichever way you'd like to put it. So Afghanistan becomes like a safety wall, which lets off the pressure and which lets the world know that, okay, considering the present international environment is a little more turbulent than what it was previously. So Afghanistan becomes a theater where both the countries can show that, look, we are there to cooperate with each other whenever we can. And we are not so much in conflict with each other that you can play us against each other the way you like. So it's more or less like a safety wall, in my opinion.
And a handy message to other powers in the region and to powers in the West, as the case may be. Chayanika Saxena, thank you very much for joining us and giving us some insight into the fact that dragons and elephants can sit down and have a picnic together occasionally.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for having me on the show.